We were talking before the break about some of the things you have to do in order to get those big boy paychecks in college football these days, such as move a home game to Friday night occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that's going to become more and more important is a recent court case that's being settled. That's basically paved the way for schools to directly pay players. Like that's the there's a lot in there in House versus NCAA, but that's one of the main takeaways is that moving forward, probably fall of 2025, we're going to be looking at a world in which there is some sort of salary cap directly provided by the schools, and they 20 to 22, 25, somewhere in there, $1 million directly paid out to student athletes from the universities themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so those paychecks from places like the Big Ten on their television deals and things like that just became that much more important. And there's a lot of ramifications here to what we're talking about because that money's still going to have to be Title IX compliant, from what I'm
That's
understanding.
yeah.
That money and the Title IX compliance thing concerns me a little bit because what I think that's going to cause schools to do long term is dramatically reduce the offerings they give in sports. Because if you've got $20 to $22 million to spend,
Mm-hmm.
most of that's going to go to revenue sports, or you're going to want most of it to go to revenue sports. You're going to have to even that out on the Title IX side with non-revenue sports, or depends on where you're at. Volleyball or women's basketball can be revenue sports, but they're not a ton of places. And then what do you do with everything else, right? I'm afraid we're going to get to the point where it's going to be the revenue sports, enough women's sports to balance that out Title IX, and they will get rid of everything else.
It could happen. It depends on some schools are going to have to seriously entertain that.
Yeah.
Right? Because it depends on like your fiscal savvy in terms of. I mean, Nebraska can't lose track and field. You wouldn't think, right?
You would hope not.
Nebraska would not want to lose wrestling, right?
You would hope not.
So
A bunch of schools are going to lose baseball. A bunch.
yeah, it's interesting because I look at it even locally, like if you're Creighton at a non-football school
Mm-hmm.
in a power conference,
I think it's easier for Creighton than almost anybody.
you're talking about relative to like Connecticut.
Relative to a place like Connecticut that has football, like Connecticut's life is dramatically more complicated than Nebraska or than Creighton's, because Connecticut doesn't have big football money, but if they're going to be competitive at football at all, there's still a price tag there.
Yeah, but here's the thing: if you're, I don't know if I agree with that because Creighton doesn't have a non-revenue generating monster to deal with. Connecticut football can't be making money.
Right.
So
they're probably going to they should end up cutting football.
But just think about that's the thing. You're saying it's easier for Creighton because they don't have that problem?
Well, it is because they don't have to make the decision to cut football. Like UConn's going to be faced with the decision to either try and be competitive in football, which is likely going to be cost prohibitive considering their current situation.
So what happens if
unless they want to fall back to like
whatever
FCS.
conference revenue you're getting from your sport that you're sharing because you have a football team, is that more than you would get if you don't have a football team at all? I don't know if I agree with that.
Well, my thought is if you're UConn and you're trying to be competitive in this new world of college football, it's going to cost more than they currently or than they will get from their current football situation. Like they're not currently earning enough on football or from their TV deals or whatever
to be worrying about getting the check at the end, however small that is, because you're spending more during the season.
So, like, if they want to fall, like Villanova has football too, but they're FCS, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they want to come down and be like an FCS program where it's not as cost prohibitive, considering the money they're bringing in, that would make sense to me. But UConn's going to have to make some really difficult decisions considering football. And then it becomes the football. The other thing, like football makes
for
everything.
that matter, I mean, baseball as well.
Yes, right? That's why I said a lot of baseball programs are going to get cut because they're generally non-revenue generators at most places. And they can be kind of expensive to operate, and they're doubly expensive because then you have to come up with 11.7 worth of scholarships on the women's side, and whatever you're paying those guys from your $20 million, you have to pay that on the women. So like, it's not just the cost of operating baseball; it's then double the cost of operating something equal on the women's side. So baseball is going to get cut a lot of places because it doesn't make money in very many places outside of the Southeast.
That would be a crazy sport, especially given the fact of how networks have really gone all in promoting the sport for schools to have to do one of the quote unquote major sports.
So the other thing that they could do is if those TV networks still want that inventory,
piece out some of the money,
is to pay them.
Yeah.
Right. Make it a revenue generator.
That's the thing.
But one of those two things is going to happen. Either it's not going to make money and they're going to have to get rid of it in order to enable all these other things they have to do. Or
so how much longer is the Big Ten going to keep paying Jim Delaney? Because maybe they could take some of that 5.1 or 2 mil
consulting fee
that he get. Listen, he still gets bonuses. Do you read? Like, it's incredible.
That's wild.
Like,
ain't nothing like a golden parachute.
Well, he's the Big Ten's highest paid employee,
which is nuts.
It's ridiculous.
How long has Delaney been gone? 5 years?
I was like, because until yesterday or whenever you told me about this, and then I went and read about it, I was not under the impression.
That's staggering.
Yeah, I was not under the impression that he was.
So they're on the hook for his retirement.
Yeah, apparently.
They got his retirement. They've got his bonus.
He must
his
have
consulting fee.
He must have the best agent in the business.
I wonder how much he had to do with the recent television deal.
I don't know.
Right? Because remember, they didn't want to give Warren any credit.
If that's what he's stayed on to consult for, like, okay, yeah, pay him.
$5 million
out of what they're getting.
I tell you.
Like if he was the facilitator of that negotiation,
we're totally speculating.
Yeah, we are, but that's the only way that would.
I mean, Petiti does come from the television
role, but that's what I'm saying.
I probably would ride with that guy.
The only way it makes sense to me is if Delaney was crucial to those negotiations.
Paying him $5 million to get your 600.
Yeah, if he wasn't crucial to getting that number, then what are you doing?
Yeah, makes sense out loud.
Yeah, well, that's the only way it makes sense out loud. Otherwise, you're paying a guy $5 million for what? Like, what else could he possibly be doing that's worth $5 million? Because I'm pretty sure the answer is nothing.
Yeah. So the sports, you worry about school. This is just me, because for opportunities for student athletes, and I brought them up yesterday. You got to think schools like Stanford, even UCLA. Some of these schools that have had runs before an Olympic sports have to be in serious trouble. Now, if you let football be its own, the only saving grace could potentially be is if you let football be its own thing. And it does not adhere to the Title IX compliances, then you let the rest of your academic sports programs do with them what you will. Let them operate as is. And let the departments piece them off some money.
The issue there is going to be that's going to have to be a legal precedent set.
It is
not an NCAA issue.
But that's how everything.
No, I know.
Yeah, I'm operating under that assumption.
But that's my only point to bringing that up is like that's a significant change that would.
Hasn't everything else we've done become legal precedent in terms of government and courts and not? What FSU is getting ready to pull off is certainly above the NCAA's pay grade.
Yes, everything recently is like starting in the last 10 years, probably.
While we're at it, revenue sharing is significantly above the NCAA's pay grade.
This was a court settled case.
That's not surprising.
No, I just mean
and assume that would happen.
I just mean to say, like, because we've talked a lot about college football sort of separating itself conference wise. And so you can still do regional conferences for Olympic sports or like separating itself in a collegiate athletic standpoint. It would have to be separated legally which
I think they're well aware.
That's fine. It's a more arduous process, is my point, than the NCAA. Well, maybe, I don't know. The NCAA doesn't exactly move quickly, but there would have to be legislation passed to have a Title IX exemption for college football, and I don't know what that looks like in terms of. You know what I did find super interesting though, is as part of this settlement, so that the of the schools helping the NCAA pay this back money for this House versus NCAA case, one of the contingencies is the schools now have to lobby for the NCAA to get monopoly exemption status.
Yeah. They're at the mercy though, right? I mean, it's the ultimate middle finger.
Yeah.
Like, why would I mean? Okay, enough's enough. You made our life miserable.
Yeah.
Long enough.
Now you got to help us out.
Now you got to help us out, and you're going to be it's obligatory, right?
Yeah.
It's like
you're legally obligated to help us out now.
Yeah.
I thought
it
that
is
was
now your fiduciary responsibility, fellas.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting that was part of the settlement agreement.
Wow.
Was that it was like, hey, I know you've kicked us around a little bit here, but now it's time to play nice and be friends.
God, it gets complicated in a hurry.
It really does. It really does. We're no longer talking about conference or governing bodies.
Can we get back to what Title IX was originally intended to be? Because we have definitely gotten away from that.
We can get into that next year on Hurrdat Sports Radio.